It's Monday, September 29th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. Today on the show, a panel of Indigenous young adults will share their thoughts ahead of the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. And we will also talk about the Sisters in Spirit Vigil, which honors missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. So it's been 10 years since the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada released its final reports and 94 calls to action. The TRC was established in 2008 as part of the Residential Schools Agreement, Settlement Agreement. Its purpose was to document the history and lasting impacts of residential schools, provide a safe space for survivors to share their stories, promote public education and awareness, lay the foundation for reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. The TRC spent 6 years traveling the country and heard from more than 6,500 witnesses, many of whom were residential school survivors. So ahead of tomorrow, ahead of the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, here on The Signal today, we have Indigenous young adults, one in studio, three on the line, to get their thoughts on the day, on some on progress, a lot on work that still needs to be done. Draco Dunphy is here in studio. Thanks for coming back to the show. Give us a little introduction of yourself, Draco.
Deloisi Draco Dunphy. I'm a master's student at Memorial University. I do a lot of language revitalization and some Indigenous community economic development. Kind of working on the Mi'kmaq language right now, but I've worked with a couple other languages too. Kind of working on some broader strategies for language revitalization overall.
Excellent. Three folks on the line. We'll go first to Samantha Saksagiak, who I believe is in Corner Brook today. Samantha, how are you doing?
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon from wherever you're listening from. Samantha Saksagiak bunga nani munguvunga. Hello, everybody. My name is Samantha Saksagiak, and I'm from Nain, Labrador, Nunat Sabut. I am a undergrad student at Memorial University studying law and public policy with plans to become a human rights lawyer for Indigenous people, and I'm glad to be here today.
Samantha, I appreciate you making the time to come on the show. Brooklyn Standford is on the line. Hello, Brooklyn.
Hi, Gwe. I'm Brooklyn Standford. I'm from Central Newfoundland. I'm an Indigenous artist, and I'm thankful to be here with you guys today.
Thank you. And Jordan Lawrence is also on the line. Hi, Jordan.
Great.
Tell us a bit about yourself.
Deloisi Jordan Lawrence, Galewi Gander. So my name's Jordan Lawrence. I'm originally from Gander, Newfoundland, but I'm residing in Corner Brook right now. I'm of Mi'kmaq and settler ancestry, and I'm studying my master's at Grenfell here in environmental policy.
All right, excellent. Well, Jordan, we'll stay with you, and then I'll circle back and slowly get back to the studio once we talk to each person on the phone. With tomorrow being the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, what's something, or what are some things that are on your mind this year as we almost are on the day?
That's a good way to start.
And I know that's really broad, so we can drill down into points if you want. Yeah.
No, it's good. It's a lot. It's pretty overwhelming. You see, like a lot of people have mentioned, this came out almost 10 years ago, I think you mentioned, and I think by the time, like at the rate we're meeting all the calls to action, it's going to be like another 100 years before this is actually done. But in Newfoundland, it seems like, and Labrador, but I can speak from my experience and from the Mi'kmaq community that I'm a part of, that there's still a lack of recognition of our history, of our political struggle, and our inclusion in certain conversations. I believe we were talking about, like, the other day when the wampum beads were found in Fairland, and it was like this big, holy guacamole sort of thing. Like, can't believe once in a lifetime that must have been brought here by European people. And my first thought was, did they speak to any Mi'kmaq community members and see, what their perspective on this And there was just one small example where I still see people speaking for Indigenous peoples in Newfoundland and Labrador. So that's what comes to mind first. But yeah.
No, I mean, and there's lots there, and it's I know on a given day, a given month, a given year, the thoughts will be different. But each year, it comes down to, well, is there progress that can be tracked? Is there not? What has been in the media? What are the stories that are in the media recently? What is that history conversation for Newfoundland and Labrador with Indigenous peoples, and also, yes, like you're kind of alluding to there or speaking about, years of when it comes to oral history, years of for Newfoundland and Labrador ignoring it too. So yes,
yeah, exactly. The complete omission of Indigenous peoples from 1949 to now, like, it's been a struggle, and I think one thing I want to also say is that we have to celebrate Indigenous success on days like this. So it's not all doom and gloom. There is a lot of positive things being done in community, but yeah, these days do tend to make you think of the lack of.
Yeah, well, I can easily see how it is. A day to kind of be like, well, wait, where are we? What has happened? And like you said, pointing to the lack of. Brooklyn, Standford, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Good. What's on your mind this year? I mean, we talked in the lead up to the show. You mentioned yourself being an Indigenous artist. You talked about language in schools. Like, just kind of tell us what's on your mind ahead of this National Day for Truth and Reconciliation.
Yeah, well, I think moving forward, everybody wants more things done in community, and I think language, it should be a top priority. Everybody should be focusing on right now. I would like more language introduced in schools, probably starting in elementary school, and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, exactly, right. It's a focal point. Draco, I want to bring you in too. Like, me and you were talking about language before the show. What are your thoughts just around the importance of language and of from shoring things up, in some cases saving language, in other cases shoring up and just making so that things are more across the board mainstream, so that it's just part of society, and that amount of work doesn't have to be put into it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one point you made just before getting on the show, you can say all these Russian hockey players' names, and yet, how many people struggle to pronounce the name of an Indigenous community or an Indigenous person from a community that might be right next door to them.
And that was the thing, to the point, to fill in the rest of the room for Newfoundland and Labrador, for if you're listening to the signal right now, Draco and I were talking about, and me, I'm a 45-year-old settler here in Newfoundland and Labrador, and I grew up, yes, the Russian hockey player names, European names, they were always in my head, watching hockey growing up. But then as an adult, I'm learning more. And so certain things and names that I found hard to pronounce as an adult, I kind of thought, why didn't I know this beforehand? And I think that points when we talk about tomorrow and where things are at, I think some of that speaks for itself.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at it one way or another way, but, at least up over the last 10 years at Memorial University, you get courses in Russian, Spanish, German, Latin, ancient Greek, Sanskrit, Japanese, Irish, Italian. And, when's the last time Memorial University, at least at St. John's campus, had courses in Innu, had courses in Mi'kmaq? Fortunately, we've got the Inuktitut courses back at least somewhat regularly over the last several years. But, Memorial University signed on to have courses and degree and diploma programs in Indigenous languages. But, I know from the inside how hard it can be just to get more or less all partners aligned. And I think one of the broader issues that comes around is the TRC and stalling on that. A lot of leaders have been stalling on it. If they don't have it in public eye. They feel they don't need to address it. They can just kind of bury it, and at some point over the next 61 or 100 years, maybe they'll get around to it. But that's simply not good enough. And, that's kind of where I see one of the broader issues is an overall strategy for reconciliation. And sometimes that's just lacking, both in institutions and in government.
Samantha, what about yourself? What are you thinking about this year?
What I'm thinking about this year is that over 150,000 students went to residential schools. Thousands died. It's not just hundreds, it's not just thousand, it's not 100,000, it's 150, over 150,000. And I'd like to recognize my friend's work, Paige Cox, where she has a project where she does more than just a number. And these over 150,000 youth who went to residential school, they're not just a statistic, not just a number, but real living people who went through hell in these residential schools. And what happened is still having lasting impact on youth today. And it's not just a news story, it's not just an article, it's a real lived experience that we are still feeling and going through.
So Samantha, what more work because when you for everything you just said, and for truth and reconciliation, first there's the truth, and then comes the reconciliation, and there's a lot of work around reconciliation that has to happen for it to be fulsome, for it to be honest, for it to be effective, for it to be at some point in time complete. What are some things you want to see for further progress? And folks, I will say, according to, I'm just on the DowneyWenjack.ca, which is tracking, 10 years later, some progress has been made, it says. However, only 15 of the 94 calls to action have been fulfilled. So go ahead, Samantha.
I would like to see Indigenous communities have clean drinking water. I would like to see Indigenous people not dying because the government refuses to offer basic life services. Like in my community, if you break your leg and the weather is bad, you're out of luck. You might die because the government refuses to offer these basic services. So what I would like to see done is for our main basic human rights for Indigenous people to be fulfilled. And that is not much to ask for, but it's silly we have to ask for it in 2025.
Jordan Lawrence, anything you want to build on from what's been being said?
I just want to lift up Samantha's points. I really sometimes think that a lot of the communities that she's mentioning, particularly in we live in Newfoundland and Labrador, and I know just from having friends in northern Labrador communities that they need more support, they need more help. It's insane. It's insane. That they have to go through those things. So I just wanted to lend more support to Samantha's comments, and that healthcare and education and all these things are, people are doing some good work, It's not that people aren't trying, but we aren't doing enough. So
Draco, what about yourself?
Yeah, sometimes it's easy to get wrapped up in the work of stuff because you know what? Sometimes people aren't putting in the work. And that's where I think sometimes young community leaders especially can bear a lot. And community leaders in general bear a lot of burden with reconciliation. But, the need for allies is there, I think. And talking with some people today, just before the show, talking about feeling like they shouldn't be supporting certain things because they feel a little awkward in supporting reconciliation, like it's not their place. And it's like, I respect that, and I'm glad that you feel that you shouldn't be leading reconciliation, but I still need your help. I think one of the things that's been concerning me a lot recently has been the increase in of racism towards Indigenous people online. And I think, a direct example I can give right now is saw one of the federal government's points or Facebook posts about reconciliation, National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Comments were limited. And the comments were limited and, no further comments were allowed because people were making racist comments in those sections, And it's sad. It's sad. It's supposed to be a day of memorial, but sometimes people even deny it. You see a rise in the denial of residential schools. So it's one of those cases where I think it's important that the everyday person realize that, yeah, this matters to you too. It's not just government. It's not just people. It's not just Indigenous people. This is important for all of us.
Samantha, I know that I believe it was 2 Januaries ago, so a year, anyways, January 2024, you, at the time, were the youngest participant for Nunatsiavut's Forum on Systemic Racism. I'm just wondering if you've got any thoughts looking at tomorrow's National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, and given that systemic racism and racism is part of this conversation today.
Yeah, that is something that definitely needs to be discussed and talked about, because when people think of Canada, they think Canada is this wealthy, welcoming, awesome, great, perfect country. But in Indigenous communities, we live in third world conditions, and the systems are set up, the policies are made so that Indigenous people are disproportionately affected, and we get this, I don't want to swear, but the bad end of the stick. And the systems need to change, and there's still a lot of progress that needs to happen. And Memorial University has a policy in place where if something racist happens to you at university, you must report it within a year, or else nothing can be done. And it's policies like that hinder Indigenous people from succeeding, from being able to have a good well-being, a good quality of life. And it affects us every day, and it's an everyday thing, and it's real.
Thank you, Samantha. Brooklyn, Standford, I'll just go back to you for your thoughts. If there's anything that anyone has said that's spoken to you, or if you've got thoughts on allyship, or just what the day-to-day in central Newfoundland and as a young Indigenous person, given we're talking about truth and reconciliation.
Yeah, just jumping off of systems that need work, I'd like to talk about the amount of kids, specifically Indigenous kids, in the foster system. Indigenous kids are almost 5 times more likely than non to be in the system. And I think more family support should be put in place, and more mental health care should be provided for families, and less extraction should be made for the kids.
Thank you so much for that. Jordan Lawrence, a question for you. This is it's a young adult panel, and given the topic today, there's I think responsibility people will take on themselves that each of you is doing around talking about truth and reconciliation and being young leaders in community. What's the balance of that you're seeing through conversations around balancing responsibility, wanting to take it, but also the stress around that in community for as you try to move forward and make progress in your own ways?
Yeah, it can be exhausting. I think, speaking personally, and also just knowing people in the community who are also trying to advocate and put themselves out there, and it's like this, it's like this real circular system where the mainstream education, I mean, like the education system in general, the healthcare systems in general, the political systems in general, they're not really set up to support Indigenous people advocating for themselves or their communities. So what happens is you get people who are really motivated, young people are really motivated, and they put themselves out there. And because the general public doesn't have the information to understand the pain or the frustration that these people have, it leads to, real stress and burnout. So you end up having youth or community members who just don't want to advocate anymore, and it's because it's not safe. And that leads to that circular system where if you don't have people advocating for themselves because they're just too tired or too stressed out, or they can't, it's mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually hurting them, then you don't have those people helping move things forward. And again, it just feeds into the system of a Western colonial type mindset being the dominant form, and it becomes a real struggle to try and make change. So that's sort of a general idea of what I'm thinking about that.
Yeah, as you wait for some folks to unlearn, some folks to learn, right? So from the disinformation, the false narratives that are out there, but then also the history that was never learned to begin with, trying to figure out who may or may not be an ally, all within these colonial structures, and just working in community for community health, depending, for individual communities as it is. So all of that is out there. Draco, what do you think?
Yeah, that truth before reconciliation part still needs to happen. And when I see the number of people out here denying residential schools, you see that a lot on Facebook and a lot of people doing that. I mean, it just goes to show why the need for education matters. And, talking about Brooklyn's point earlier about, children in foster care and so on and so forth, one of the calls to action was to just release reports on it. Just release reports on numbers. And they're still not doing that. How long does it take to release a report every year on just the numbers of people going through the system? If they're already going through the system, I'm sure the numbers exist. Why aren't the reports being made? Why isn't that being monitored? And I mean, if you want to make it so that we can facilitate truth and actually make sure that people understand what's going on, some of these calls to actions just need to be addressed. That's kind of where I see some of this stuff. I feel bad in some ways because while there are a lot of legitimately just hateful people who don't like Indigenous people for whatever reason and they're against us, that's one thing. But I know that they're actually a very, very, very small proportion of the population relative to the number of people that just don't know any better, legitimately. And that's been something that makes me happy in some ways. But it makes me frustrated because I know how many more people, if they'd only realize just the extent of it, would be on our side, That matters to me. And that's why it's like when you talk about young people who step up and put the world on their shoulders, that's a real thing you see. So sometimes people don't realize how much as an individual, not just an Indigenous person, but like an ordinary individual, you can make a big difference for Indigenous people. I mean, some of these youth are out here and organizations are more or less running on shoestring budgets trying to do everything themselves because they're not getting support either from the government or community or wherever they're getting support from. But, people don't realize if you got to spare $20, sometimes that'll make a big difference to a small Indigenous organization that's running on volunteers alone. And that's something that I just want to put out there while I can.
And as we get ready to wrap it, we've got two panels today,
Yeah.
so we've got another one coming up. But two quick questions. I'll be asking folks for their final thoughts. But Draco, for you to, there's a provincial election campaign happening. Are you hearing conversation around truth and reconciliation on the campaign trail?
I'm not hearing as much as I think. And I know we're not even hearing anywhere near as much as we heard in 2021. If you look back at the 2021 election, there were a lot of things that were promised for Indigenous people across each of the parties, some parties more than others. But, I'm not even seeing a fraction of the amount that people had talked about in that election. And it seems to be because people aren't thinking it's as important. So that's where, it's 10 years out, but reconciliation is a day-by-day effort. And that's where, for everyone who's listening today, I'd have more or less three things that I'd ask. I'd ask if you got a spare few dollars to donate to an Indigenous organization in Newfoundland, Labrador, I'd ask you to do that. Whether it's the Oktahumguk Mi'kmaq Fluency Project, whether it's First Light, whether it's the Mokami Women's Shelter in Labrador, wherever you can put a few dollars, I'd ask you to do that. Secondly, for the Indigenous youth who are at home and, are a little bit concerned for the future, I'd ask you to continue to step up to be leaders because we need each one of you to be a leader in your own right. And for the general public or, managers, employers, teachers, and so on and so forth, when you got young Indigenous youth who are out here doing all kinds of activism, I'm asking you to just cut them a break in some ways, because sometimes they're pouring more out than you see, and it might not be in the same places, but they're putting a lot of work out there. So that's why I'm asking a bit of compassion for people and a bit of memory. Step back and think about things tomorrow.
Thank you so much for that. Samantha Saksagiak, final thoughts from you today?
The last thing that I would want to say for people to take away is that a lot of times in media, Indigenous people are portrayed as these people who do crimes and we go to jail and that we abuse substances. Like, that's what you hear about us in the media, because the education is not built to portray us in a good way. So I want to leave off with people thinking about the conversation we had today. There are youth who are putting in the work, and we are changing the narrative. And there are strong Indigenous people who are so strong. We're fighting the education systems, and we're so much more than the media portrays us. And I wish people knew that there are really good Indigenous people out there.
Thank you, Samantha. Brooklyn, Standford, final thoughts.
Yeah, the only thing I would like to say to end this off is remember that reconciliation is not a phrase, it's an action. So get out there and do what you can for people and your community. And thanks for having me on today.
Thank you. And Jordan Lawrence, final thoughts.
I think I would ask that, I think someone mentioned it, that this is for everybody. Truth and reconciliation, the calls to action are for everybody. So take some time out of your life someday and read them. And, maybe there's something in there that you can contribute to. There's something that resonates with you. There's something that you can internalize in your own being that you carry out in your life. And I think if everybody does that, we will have a better chance at reaching those calls to action in a shorter period of time than what we're currently on pace for.
Jordan, Brooklyn, Samantha, Draco, thank you. Thank you so much for today. You're listening to The Signal. I'm Adam Walsh. Saturday, October 4th is the annual Sisters in Spirit Vigil. This vigil honors missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. It's a time for family, friends, and community members to gather, remember their loved ones, and stand together in solidarity. I've got a group here in the studio, and they're going to speak with me about the significance of this event, who it's for, and we'll go further into it. We've got Brooke Temple, Inclusion Manager, First Light. Brooke, how you doing?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Amena Harlick is here, community member. Hello.
Hi.
Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
And Bridget Clarke, Advocacy Coordinator, St. John's Status of Women Council. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Brooke, I gave a brief introduction, but can you just give us some more details around the Sisters in Spirit Vigil?
Sure, absolutely, I can. So October 4th is the National Day of Action for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Gender Diverse People. So across Turtle Island, there will be Sisters in Spirit events hosted, whether it's facilitating marches and rallies or vigils and feasts. The National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls reminds us that commemoration is an essential part of truth gathering, healing, and reconciliation. So our event focuses on creating a safe space for families and friends to collectively heal and grieve together, as well as sharing fond memories and stories of those who were taken from us far too soon. For Indigenous people, gathering together to heal is sacred and it's ceremony. It reminds us that we're not alone in our journey and we have each other to lean on. Creating space for families and friends to come together to honor and remember and celebrate our loved ones is a critical component to our healing. There are a few spaces and opportunities for this to happen in community that offers safety, including cultural safety.
So what's it like every year? It must be powerful.
It is. It's very powerful. It's emotional. It's heavy, but it's also really healing. It's it's that collective healing together where it's all shared, and it's not, we've pivoted the past few years where we are celebrating our loved ones, and even though they're not here with us, this is how we remember them and make sure that their name isn't forgotten.
Yeah. Amena, what's it been like for you? Can you tell us just a bit about yourself and what it means?
I'm Amena. I don't know. I see it as a community.
Yeah.
There is a different feeling when you enter this vigil, and I felt it since I went to it for the first time 10 years ago. Everyone has such a great understanding for what it's like to lose someone to violence or have someone go missing. And you feel at home with these people, you feel understood, you feel heard, and you feel loved in a way that it's hard to kind of have that anywhere else, you know?
Yeah. And for, Indigenous communities across Turtle Island, so many folks have been impacted and have lost loved ones. This is something that's impacted you personally as well.
Yeah, I lost my mom in 2002, and, it's been 23 years, and I still think of her every day. Listening to Henrietta, that's a song that I often think of my mom about. So it kind of feels like she's here with me today, and, it's hard to navigate life without a mom and becoming a mom and all that kind of stuff. It's weird.
Congratulations on becoming a mom. Welcome. For these events, for community, Bridget, can you talk about the status of Women Council's kind of role with this and why it's so important?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is an event that is done in partnership with First Light and the St. John's Status of Women Council. And I say partnership, but I really cannot commend the team at First Light enough for your leadership and generosity and guidance over the years, particularly around this event. And a big reason around why the partnership exists is to remember the people who we have lost from the province or in the province, and also to recognize that gender-based violence and colonialism have these really long-standing ties and connections. And, oftentimes when we have conversations about gender-based violence, it's around how it most often happens statistically is by people known to us. However, it's also really important to recognize that gender-based violence happens in our institutions and our systems as well, and that there's deep ties to colonialism there. And a part of that partnership as well that exists is holding and maintaining the list of names of people who we remember and honor every year through this event and beyond.
In the first half of today's show, we were talking about tomorrow, the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. We talked about progress, and a lot of this is around the lack of progress. So when we think of something like a vigil, and when you see there's obviously great progress in just the fact that there is a vigil, and there are vigils across the country, and people are coming together, and that is powerful, that is important. And then there's, when we talk intimate partner violence, and if we look at the 231 calls for justice following the missing and murdered inquiry, where are we now with progress in this country, do we think? And I say this as we have a provincial election coming.
So I will say that the calls that the federal government are responsible for, there were 3 completed, but 1 has been since revoked because it was not completed. So from 2019, we only have 2 of those completed. Obviously, that is a major concern. So in saying that, addressing gender-based violence requires political will and accountability and investing in resources in community, committing to preventative approaches, rethinking and rebuilding many of those colonial systems and social infrastructures that has and continues to fail us. We know that Newfoundland and Labrador has higher rates of domestic violence than the national average, and it's happening in our communities at an epidemic level. Additionally, we know that rates of violence are statistically higher among Indigenous women. For simply existing, Indigenous women are 12 times more likely to be murdered or go missing compared to non-Indigenous women in Canada, and 16 times more likely than white women. And this highlights a national crisis rooted in systemic racism and colonialism. When we're talking about only 2 calls for justice being completed, this is a major concern. First Light released a report in October of 2022 entitled Building Trust, Restoring Confidence. And it included 26 proposals, including a creation of police oversight, because unfortunately systemic racism is very intertwined with the issue that we're speaking to today. So before the House closed earlier this year, there was Bill 102 that was passed for the Law Enforcement Oversight Commission. So that is a complaint process to ensure independent civilian oversight of police conduct. And this was passed March 18th. And it is a significant step, and we recognize that, and we welcome this progress as a strong starting point. And I want to emphasize starting point, because there is significant amount of work that still needs to happen. You spoke about the election that's coming up, and I've yet to hear much, if any, discussion. And I think that's being generous in addressing the issues that Indigenous people face, or that we all face as a collective. Gender-based violence is not an isolated issue. It's not just an Indigenous-specific issue.
What does that say to you that you haven't heard anything about it?
It's concerning. It's very concerning. These Sisters in Spirit Vigils are so powerful, and Orange Shirt Day tomorrow, Truth and Reconciliation, so powerful. And it needs to be done not just as a hot topic, not just as an obligation, not just as a check off the list. We're talking about people's safety and well-being at stake here.
In the last half hour, we talked as well about allies and folks doing the work. When I say that, what are your thoughts on what that means for either of you?
For many years, I have been speaking to media about the Sisters in Spirit Vigil, how I've attended, and, how is best for people to show up for our community. With Truth and Reconciliation Day, you see lots of people wearing orange. You see lots of people showing up to community events such as at the Colonial Building or at the Confederation Building tomorrow. But you never see people show up and wear red. The wider community will celebrate us when we are saying we are still here. They will celebrate us when we're showing off our pride, like National Indigenous Peoples Day. But when we are asking the wider community to show up for us when we're hurting, there's no one around. And they don't show up. And it really feels like I will show up when it's convenient for me. But when we are living through these truths, through all the pain that we've endured over the years, it can be isolating when you don't have a community to fall back on and to listen to your truths, to listen to your pain, and to listen to your sorrow, and for people to back us up and say, I'm here for you.
You mentioned the convenience side of it, but why else do you think that is, that people stay away and that yet they'll show up in other? So on top of the convenience side, why else do you think that is?
I think it's easier for most people to show up when it's a celebration. But when it's hard, they don't want to hear the truth of the genocide that Indigenous women are facing in the grand scheme of things. Like, it's still happening today. It's not going to stop unless people help us and rally behind us and amplify our voices, because we're getting tired.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this came up in the last half hour too. Draco Dunphy talking about just the toll it can take on the leaders in community who are doing the leadership, and there's only so much in a cup of an individual of bringing stuff forward, someone like yourself, of speaking to media time and time again, of trying to get people to show up to the vigil and wondering about progress and where things are, whether it's truth and reconciliation, or acknowledging and thinking about the missing and the murdered in this country. Brooke, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I mean, there's a culture of silence here in Newfoundland. I've spoken about it before. I know Bridget and Amena have spoken to it as well. And that is really dangerous. And the first step in creating safety is acknowledging it and breaking that culture of safety. Violence is deeply connected to poverty, to wage inequality, to our housing crisis, to isolation. It even touches, our criminal justice system, our foster care system, as mentioned in the last panel as well, our health care. People are more likely to live in safety when their basic needs are met. All of these things are interconnected. None of them are isolated. It is quite the heavy burden to bear. Being an Indigenous woman sitting here now, I mean, to simply exist and be 12 times more likely to die by violence or to go missing.
Yeah.
Wow. Especially when you're a mom. And there is not one Indigenous person that I know that doesn't know somebody who has been stolen from us way too soon. Bridget spoke to the list that we share in guarding for Newfoundland and Labrador, and we have unfortunately reached over 160 names this year on that list of missing and murdered women, girls, and gender diverse folks. One is far too many, let alone over 160. And to continue to do that work, because it is important. Truth and reconciliation, that is important. Speaking about what we're speaking about today, it's very important. They're all intertwined. They're all a direct result of colonialism. We all have intergenerational trauma, but we all have intergenerational love, and it's hard to remember that sometimes. And we are tired. Of course we are, because we should never have to be in this position where we're advocating for change for decades and decades and decades. But we will, of course, continue to do so. It would be much more comforting to see our community show up and not put the education piece on Indigenous folks as well. There's a lot of labor emotionally and mentally that comes with that. Always happy to have a conversation. Make sure that you're doing the work too. Don't put all of that work on Indigenous folks too.
So the final report for the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls and Gender Diverse Folks, it was delivered to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau June 3rd, 2019. This report concluded the crisis amounts to a genocide. So on June 3rd, 2019, I'm just wondering if we're comparing, what was the feeling like when this was first put out into the world and with these calls, and now, as the years go by, how are you feeling now for a compare and contrast on it?
I feel when the report was first released, there was a lot of people talking about it, a lot of people sharing it around, and there was a lot of coverage behind it, and also people realizing the impacts of what gender-based violence is doing to the Indigenous community. And no one talks about it now. I haven't seen a single political leader mention it. Even in our federal election, I have never heard of it since, I think 2016 was the last time I saw that missing and murdered Indigenous women and two-spirited people was mentioned. And to not have a single political leader bring up something that was so important a few years ago is very disheartening, and, as Brooke has said many times, very scary that it can be so important. We can release a report, we can talk about it, and then we can shove it under a rug like it's meaningless and it doesn't mean anything at all.
Brooke?
Just as when the original 215 children were found and the shockwaves that came from the masses of, wow, what a horrific event. I can't believe this happened under our noses. Everybody turned a blind eye. It's shocking. We don't hear about those things anymore. Same as missing and murdered Indigenous women, right? We didn't know about it. We didn't know. We didn't know. We did know. Indigenous people have been speaking to these things for years and years and years. We have known, we have been doing everything we can for it to be known while dealing with the trauma that gets passed through generations and generations of experiencing such horrific conditions. And yet, like Amena said, we haven't heard anything when it comes to the safety of Indigenous folks, particularly women and girls. It is really disheartening. It's also very frustrating when Indigenous voices and communities have been saying, this is happening, something needs to change, we need to do something. And it's not until it's right in your face, or like Amena highlighted in 2016, the big election, where all of a sudden it's a topic of conversation. It's very disheartening. It's very frustrating. Just as we believe survivors of any type of gender-based violence or any violence as a whole, we believe survivors, we should be believing Indigenous people as well, and it shouldn't take such substantial evidence in your face to act.
Yeah, in the first panel I mentioned how there's the history of not believing oral history in this country, and I should have just said just not believing, then period, right? Full stop, to get to where we are right now.
It's unfortunate. It's an unfortunate reality, and we, of course, continue to be hopeful for change because we have to be. And it's hard to make those changes when we don't have the support behind us. And support has changed over the years, you know. There is more of an acceptance. It is becoming safer to identify as Indigenous. We know that that was not always the case. We know that sometimes that is still not the case. And I would encourage everybody to educate themselves, to read the National Inquiry, to read the Truth and Reconciliation Act, to have conversations, to do anything that they can, whether you're Indigenous or not.
Bridget, Clarke, any final thoughts from you today?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo everything that you both have had to say, and thank you for sharing everything. And the only other thing I'll add is that, in just different words, really, is that Indigenous people and communities and leaders and organizations have been making their calls either formally through calls of action or their asks for support in community so clear for so long that if you are listening to this conversation and wondering how do I fit in, or if you are, you know, a leader locally and you're wondering where do I step in, the work has been done. It's abundantly clear. It's your role and responsibility to kind of tap in and make yourself available to support people, certainly this week around these two big days, but all year long.
Internalize it. Think about it. Final details for the vigil. We have 30 seconds left.
Sure. So our vigil is happening this Saturday, October the 4th. If you would like to attend, please reach out to the St. John Status Women's Center or First Light, of course. We are also live streaming it on our Facebook page as well. Please take a moment to witness not just the grief, but the power.
Brooke, Amena, Bridget, thank you so much. That is it for today's show, everyone. If you have thoughts for us on either panel today, both panels, Truth and Reconciliation, on any show, the Signal at cbc.ca. You can call the Signal line and leave us a message, 709-576-5260. We do not have a show tomorrow. We have network programming for the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. On Wednesday, we are talking politics. We have what I'm calling a people panel, regular folks in to talk politics about the provincial election and what matters to them. I want to know your thoughts. thoughts on this, get in touch with us, thesignal@cbc.ca. Cheers.